Hello CFA candidates. Only 2 more days until the Level 3 exam window opens up. I just want to share with you some tactics that have really worked effectively in the past with my former candidates. So here we go. Let's start off with the first portion of the exam, which is the so-called written part. And just to elaborate on that, it really shouldn't be called written or essay. It should really be called short answer, because that's really the formatting for that first portion of the exam. Because sometimes candidates, blow this out of proportion, thinking that they have to write like a Pulitzer Prize winning essay on some economic issue. That's not what it is. Your answers are going to be very confined, and that's why I refer to it as a short answer question. So let's start with the first rule. Number 1, answer the questions in the order in which they appear. Do not browse the exam in order to identify the easier to answer questions first. This will only put you behind, as ultimately you will have to answer all the questions. Where's this coming from? Well, I've heard some candidates use up the first 5-10 minutes of the exam. They just browse through it, and they're trying to identify questions that they think would be a good starting point. Do you have any idea how much time that wastes, right? Because you have to, it's sort of like triage. You're looking at each question, you're saying, should I try this or maybe leave it behind? There's a clock ticking, so it's not going to stop just because you want to prioritize the questions. Ultimately, it's not going to have an impact because you're going to have to answer all the questions anyways. So why not start off with the first question that appears, and then you just go in chronological order? That is the most efficient way to tackle an exam. Well, what if you come across a question that you don't understand, or you can't have, you can't put the full thoughts together? Put down whatever thoughts you do have, and then you'll come back to it. But don't waste the first 5-10 minutes of the exam going through the whole thing and trying to, like I said, categorize it. First of all, a question, so if you just spend a minute trying to assess a question, you could be misleading yourself, because in the first minute you may think, oh, like this might be easier. But then when you go deeper, there's a lot of twists and turns, and it can actually really bog you down. So it's a total waste of time to triage these questions. Do not fall in that trap. Start with question 1. Now, if you need to warm up, you do that before the exam, and not sort of rearrange questions at the beginning of the exam so that you get off to some good momentum. Number 2, read the requirements of the question before reading the case. That's a standard rule. So before you read the case, what does the question want? And then you go and start reading the case, and you'll find what you're looking for, and then you can answer it, right? Because otherwise you could be reading the whole case and not knowing what you're looking for. Number 3, the length of your answer should correspond with the points awarded to that question. Typically, for every valid point you make, you'll be awarded 1.5 to 2 marks. Now, I know in the written part, they just tell you what the question as a whole is worth. So if a question's got 3 parts or 4 parts, they don't tell you how many marks are allocated to each of those parts. But I bet you if you look closely to the wording of those parts, they'll tell you how many things they're looking for. So they'll say list 2 things, or describe 2 things, or justify with 2 reasons. So again, this is why I refer to the first part of the exam as short answer. 4, keep your responses short and to the point. Your answers are not expected to be as comprehensive as the official solution set. As well, you are not required to justify why you did not select the alternative options unless you are specifically asked to do so. And this is what I want to emphasize. Now, before I told you I used to be an MBA prof, I have graded thousands of exams. Thousands. And in the page, so the written parts, right? I would go through it in like 20 seconds because I'm looking for keywords. Boom, 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 right? So that's what the grader's looking for, is those keywords, right? So you don't have to have an elaborate answer. Short and to the point. 5, if the question asks you to list 2 items, only the first 2 items will be graded. So even if you listed 5 things, only the first 2 will be graded. Well, what if your first 2 points were wrong and the other 3 points were right? Then you get 0 points for that, because the grader will just look at the first 2 points. 6, use bullet points. That's sort of in line with short and to the point. Elaborating on your answer will likely be a waste of time. The goal is to provide a sufficient response rather than a perfect one. Let me stop right there, guys. Do you have any idea how many man-hours it takes to put a financial plan together? Like many, many hours. Many hours. You have probably 15 minutes. So don't fall in the trap of trying to look for a perfect answer, because you'll never get through the exam. So you got to think sort of like an assembly line. Just keep it going. Just keep it moving. Just provide a sufficient response, not a perfect response. Remember, you just need enough points to pass the exam. But if you have this mentality that you got to answer it perfectly, you will never make it through to the end of the exam. You'll just run out of time. However, if you do complete the exam ahead of time, then you can revisit the answers that could use a little more content. Right? So first, when you go through it, you provide a skeleton set of answers. And then if you have time, you come back and maybe you can elaborate here or there. All right? Number 7, for calculation questions, simply indicate your final answer. While inputting your calculations may qualify for part marks, the time that this will take away from other questions that you could be answering would be detrimental to your overall grade. Don't bother. Don't bother with the formulas. Just give the final answer. And I've said this before. My hypothesis is that for the first portion of the exam, I think you're going to be looking at the more qualitative topic areas, where your answers are more textual than computational. So don't worry about having to write the formulas. The time could be spent better moving on to the next questions. Now note, and this is probably the most important advice I have for you regarding the first part of the Level 3 exam. The best way to ace the written segment is by mastering the subject matter. If you've mastered the subject matter, the formatting of the question is irrelevant, because you understand it so well you'll be able to answer it no matter what the format is. On the other hand, you could do thousands of written type questions, but if you don't have a grasp of the underlying subject matter, you're going to perform very poorly on this exam. So again, the best way to master the written part is to have that solid understanding of the underlying concept. And you guys have done that through the preparation. The more knowledgeable you are, the easier it will be to answer the question. This will be by far more important than the formatting of the question, i.e. multiple choice or written. Now let's switch to the item sets, right? This will be the second part of your exam. Now each case is effectively a compilation of set of independent issues, which is often presented in the same order as the questions that follow. So this is the formatting for the item sets. You have this so-called case, but really the way I view them is they're just independent subject matters. And then you have a set of questions that follow. So what I'm suggesting is you first read the requirements of question 1, and then you go to the case, and almost 99% of the time the first segment of the case relates to the first question. So you read whatever data you need, because you've already read question 1, so you know what you're looking for. And then let's say you solve question 1. Then what do you do? Well, then you read the requirements of question 2, and then you go to the second paragraph. In other words, you just continue from where you left off after answering the first question. And then because you've read the question 2, you know exactly what you're looking for, So you get it, and then you answer it, and then you just keep repeating this process. And that's exactly what we have here. So just to finish off this paragraph, read the first item set and then proceed to read the case until you come across the section corresponding to the requirements of that question. After solving the first question, read the requirements of the next question, and then resume again your progression through the case until you solve that question. Repeat the cycle until all questions are answered. So therefore, rather than tackling the case as a whole, you break it down into little pieces, addressing each question individually. Furthermore, since the questions are independent, the outcome from a preceding question will have no impact on the outcome of a subsequent question. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you will employ some of these tactics during the exam, and we'll talk again soon.